for your continued viewership. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love knowing our global reach. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Discovery. The sterile white walls of St. Mary's Hospital had become my second home over the past 3 weeks. My wife, Brielle, lay in bed 304, her left leg elevated in traction, her face a carefully constructed mask of pain and vulnerability. She'd been here since her accident, a tragic fall down our basement stairs that resulted in a compound fracture and what the doctors called severe psychological trauma. I was Derek Holloway, 42 years old, owner of 3 successful auto repair shops across the city. 20 years of marriage had taught me to read people like I read engine diagnostics. Every sound, every hesitation, every inconsistency told a story. And Brielle's story had more holes than a rusted exhaust pipe. My 12-year-old son, Connor, fidgeted beside me as we entered the room for our evening visit. Brielle's face lit up with what I now recognized as practiced maternal warmth. "My boys," she exclaimed, reaching out with arms that trembled just enough to sell the performance. "I missed you so much." Connor rushed to her bedside, and I watched as she winced, perfectly timed, perfectly executed. 3 weeks of this charade, and she hadn't missed a beat. But I had been watching, learning, planning. "How are you feeling today, honey?" I asked, my voice carrying the concerned husband tone I perfected. "Better, I think. Dr. Morrison says the bone is healing nicely, but..." She let her voice trail off, her eyes misting over. "I keep having these nightmares about falling. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever feel safe in our own home again." Connor squeezed her hand. "It's okay, Mom. Dad's making the basement super safe. He's been working on it every night." Brielle's eyes flicked to mine, a micro-expression of concern crossing her features. She didn't know about my basement renovations because she didn't know I knew the truth. The basement where she'd never actually fallen. The basement where I'd found traces of her real activities. "That's very thoughtful of your father," she said carefully. As Connor chattered about his day at school, I studied the room with new eyes. After 3 weeks of visits, I knew every detail. The way the afternoon light hit the window, the position of every piece of equipment, the sight lines from the hallway. Most importantly, I knew about the space beneath the bed. "Daddy, I dropped my phone," Connor suddenly announced, looking under the bed. His voice changed, becoming smaller, scared. "Daddy, there's something weird under here." I moved to his side, my heart rate steady despite the moment I'd been anticipating. There, partially hidden beneath the bed frame, was a small digital recorder, the kind private investigators use for surveillance. But this wasn't surveillance equipment. I'd planted it there myself, part of a much larger web I'd been weaving. "What is it, Dad?" Connor whispered, his young voice carrying genuine fear. I palmed the device quickly, my expression shifting to one of concern and confusion. "I don't know, son, but I think we need to call someone about this." Brielle's face had gone pale, her act momentarily forgotten. "Derek, what?" "Stay calm, honey," I said, already reaching for my phone. "This might be related to, well, we need to be safe." I dialed 911, putting on my best worried husband voice. "Yes, I need to report something suspicious at St. Mary's Hospital. My wife is a patient here, and my son just found what appears to be recording equipment under her bed. Room 304. The operator's voice was crisp and professional. "Sir, we're dispatching an officer immediately. Please don't touch anything else and remain in the room." As I hung up, Brielle grabbed my arm. "Derek, what if someone's been watching me, recording me?" Her voice cracked with what sounded like genuine fear, but I knew better. She was afraid. "All right," just nodded the recorder. "It's going to be okay," I assured her, covering her hand with mine. "The police will figure this out." Connor pressed closer to me, and I put my arm around him. My son had no idea he'd just set the first domino falling in a carefully orchestrated sequence that would end with justice. My kind of justice. 20 minutes later, Officer Patricia Voss arrived. She was young but thorough, asking all the right questions while examining the recorder with latex gloves. After documenting everything and taking our statements, she bagged the device as evidence. "Mr. Holloway," she said, pulling me aside, This is definitely surveillance equipment. High-end stuff. We'll have our tech team examine it, but I have to ask, is there anyone who might want to spy on your wife? Any threats, suspicious people, anything unusual lately? I let my expression darken with protective anger. Officer, 3 weeks ago my wife had a terrible accident. She's been through enough without someone violating her privacy like this. I want whoever did this caught. We'll do everything we can, sir. In the meantime, I'd recommend requesting a room change and perhaps considering private security. After Officer Voss left, I sat beside Brielle's bed, holding her hand while Connor played on his tablet nearby. She was quieter now, lost in thought. She didn't know that the recorder contained conversations between her and her lover, Dr. Reed Morrison, her attending physician and the man she'd been having an affair with for 8 months. She also didn't know that I'd been recording them for weeks, gathering evidence not for divorce court, but for something far more permanent. Brielle had made the mistake of thinking she was smarter than me, and Dr. Morrison had made the mistake of believing he could play God with other people's lives. Derek, Brielle whispered, squeezing my hand, what if whoever planted that thing comes back? I squeezed back, my voice gentle but my eyes hard. Don't worry, sweetheart. I'll make sure no one ever hurts you again. As I spoke those words, I thought about the basement renovations Connor had mentioned, modifications that had nothing to do with safety and everything to do with justice. The same basement where Brielle claimed to have fallen, where I'd actually discovered evidence of her deception, and where very soon she and Dr. Morrison would face the consequences of their betrayal. The first piece was in play. Officer Voss would analyze the recorder, find the incriminating conversations, and begin connecting dots I'd carefully laid out for her to find. What she wouldn't realize was that she was working my case, following my evidence, moving toward my desired conclusion. I looked at my wife's worried face and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. She taught me that love was weakness, trust was foolishness, and family was just another word for people who could hurt you most. Now I was going to teach her that Derek Holloway was nobody's fool, and some lessons were permanent. Chapter 2. The Surgeon's Secret. Dr. Reed Morrison prided himself on steady hands and nerves of steel. At 38, he was one of the youngest orthopedic surgeons at St. Mary's, with a reputation for fixing what others deemed unfixable. His colleagues respected him, his patients trusted him, and until 8 months ago, he believed he was untouchable. That was before Brielle Holloway walked into his office with a sports injury that had obviously never happened. She'd been beautiful, vulnerable, and married, exactly the kind of dangerous distraction he should have avoided. Instead, he'd made the mistake of his life. Now, as he walked through the hospital corridors after learning about the recording device, Reed felt his carefully constructed world beginning to crack. The device had been found just hours after their planned meeting in the supply closet had been interrupted by an emergency surgery. Coincidence? He'd stopped believing in those months ago. Reed's background wasn't the pristine success story his colleagues imagined. Growing up in Detroit's roughest neighborhoods, he learned early that survival meant being smarter, faster, and more ruthless than everyone around you. Medical school had been his escape, but the streets had never really left him. That edge had served him well in surgery, where split-second decisions meant life or death. It had served him less well in personal relationships. He'd been married once, to a fellow doctor who discovered his tendency toward narcissism and control. The divorce had been ugly but quiet. She'd taken her settlement and moved to Seattle, taking their daughter with her. Reed had told himself he was better off alone, focusing on his career, until Brielle had made him remember what he'd been missing. The affair had started professionally enough. Brielle had come to him complaining of chronic back pain, describing symptoms that didn't match any objective findings. Most doctors would have sent her to a psychiatrist or discharged her with pain medication. Reed had seen through her immediately. She was lonely, looking for attention, trapped in a marriage to a man she described as emotionally distant and controlling. He should have maintained professional boundaries. Instead, he found himself scheduling unnecessary follow-up appointments, spending extra time with her, eventually meeting her for coffee to discuss her treatment options. The first kiss had happened in his office after hours. The first time they'd slept together had been in his apartment 3 weeks later. The relationship had been intoxicating and dangerous. Brielle was passionate, spontaneous, everything his ex-wife hadn't been. She made him feel powerful, desired, alive in ways he'd forgotten were possible. But she'd also been reckless, pushing for them to meet at the hospital, in supply closets, even suggesting they go away together for weekends. Rita tried to maintain some semblance of caution, but Brielle had a way of making his careful plans seem cowardly. When she proposed the accident scheme, he'd initially refused. The plan was insane. Fake a fall, check herself into the hospital under his care, use her recovery time to plan their future together while her husband played the dutiful visitor. He'll never suspect, she'd argued. Derek's smart with engines, but he's clueless about people. In this way, we can be together every day without anyone questioning it. I'll be your patient, you'll be my doctor, and he'll pay for my hospital room while we plan our escape. The scheme had required Reed to falsify medical records, coordinate with radiology to create convincing x-rays of a fracture that didn't exist, and maintain an elaborate fiction with his colleagues. He justified it by telling himself they were just buying time to figure out how to leave their respective situations cleanly. But 3 weeks in, Reed was beginning to suspect they weren't as clever as they'd thought. There had been small things, security cameras that seemed newly positioned, maintenance workers who appeared in odd places, conversations that felt like they were being overheard. And now the recording device. His phone buzzed with a text from Brielle. "We need to talk. Something's wrong." Reed deleted the message and tried to focus on his rounds, but his hands were shaking slightly as he reviewed patient charts. In surgery, trembling hands could kill someone. In life, they were just a sign that everything was falling apart. That evening, he found an excuse to check on Brielle during visiting hours, timing his arrival for when her family usually went to dinner. But when he entered her room, Derek Holloway was still there, sitting in the visitor's chair like he owned it. "Dr. Morrison," Derek said, standing to shake hands. "Perfect timing. I want to thank you again for taking such good care of my wife." Reed forced a smile, noting how Derek's grip lingered just a moment too long, how his eyes never left Reed's face. "Just doing my job, Mr. Holloway. How are you holding up? This has been difficult for your whole family." "We're managing," Derek replied. "Though I have to admit, finding that recording device has me concerned. Someone was obviously targeting Brielle specifically. Any idea who might want to spy on one of your patients?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Reed felt sweat gathering at his collar despite the hospital's air conditioning. "It's disturbing. Hospital security is investigating, of course. We take patient privacy very seriously." "I'm sure you do," Derek said. "Brielle speaks so highly of you. She says you've been very attentive." Reed's medical training kicked in, helping him maintain composure even as alarm bells rang in his head. "I try to provide comprehensive care. Recovery from this type of injury requires both physical and emotional support." "Exactly what I'd expect from someone with your reputation," Derek continued. "I've been asking around about you, doctor. Everyone says you're very dedicated. Sometimes you work late into the night, I hear." "Medicine is demanding," Reed managed. Derek nodded thoughtfully. "I imagine it is. Well, I should let you examine your patient. I'll just be down in the cafeteria if you need anything." After Derek left, Reed approached Brielle's bed with growing dread. She grabbed his hand immediately, pulling him closer. "He knows," she whispered urgently. "I don't know how, but he knows. You're being paranoid." The recorder wasn't random, Reed. Someone planted it there specifically. Someone who knew we'd be talking. And the way Derek was looking at you just now. Reed had seen that look too. It wasn't the confused concern of a worried husband. It was the calculating stare of a predator who'd cornered his prey. Even if he suspects something, he can't prove anything, Reed said, but his voice lacked conviction. "You don't understand," Brielle said, her grip tightening on his hand. "Derek isn't like other men. He doesn't forgive, ever. In 20 years of marriage, I've never seen him let anything slide. If he knows about us..." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to disappear. Tonight. I'll check myself out AMA. We'll take my car, and we'll drive until we hit Canada or Mexico." Reed stared at her, realizing for the first time that he was looking at someone who was genuinely terrified. Not of discovery, not of divorce, but of her husband. Brielle, you're talking about abandoning everything. Better than being dead, she cut him off. You don't know Derek like I do. He's not just going to file for divorce and move on. He's going to destroy us both, and he's going to enjoy every minute of it. As if summoned by their conversation, Derek appeared in the doorway again, holding 2 cups of coffee. Sorry, forgot to ask if you wanted anything, Dr. Morrison. Coffee? I got extra. Reed's mouth felt like sand. No, thank you. I should check on my other patients. Of course. Don't let us keep you. As Reed left the room, he heard Derek's voice, warm and conversational. Honey, I've been thinking. Maybe it's time you came home. The basement renovations are almost finished, and I think you'd be much more comfortable in familiar surroundings. Reed didn't wait to hear Brielle's response. He walked quickly toward the elevator, his mind racing. Brielle was right. They needed a run. But as the elevator doors closed, he caught sight of Derek Holloway watching him from the hallway and realized that running might already be too late. The predator had been hunting them all along, and they'd been too blinded by their own desires to see the trap closing around them. Chapter 3. The Web Titans. Detective Luis Santiago had seen enough domestic cases to know that the most dangerous moment in any marriage wasn't when the fighting started. It was when it stopped. The Holloway case had landed on his desk when the hospital surveillance equipment was processed, revealing not just the planted recorder, but something far more interesting. The recorded conversations between Brielle Holloway and Dr. Reed Morrison. 23 years on the force had taught Santiago to recognize patterns. The suspicious recording device, the convenient discovery by the child, the husband's almost theatrical concern, it all felt orchestrated. But orchestrated by whom and why? Santiago reviewed the files in his cramped office, surrounded by cold coffee and the accumulated paperwork of too many late nights. Derek Holloway owned 3 successful auto shops, paid his taxes, had no criminal record. A model citizen whose wife had suffered a tragic accident and was now apparently the victim of illegal surveillance. But something nagged at Santiago. He'd requested the original accident report from 3 weeks ago, and the details were odd. No witnesses to the fall, no emergency call until hours later, and medical evidence that was somehow both conclusive and suspicious. The fracture was real, but the circumstances felt manufactured. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Santiago. Detective, this is Officer Voss. I got an update on the Holloway surveillance case. Go ahead. I ran background checks on everyone with access to the patient's room. Dr. Morrison has some interesting history, divorce, custody issues, and get this. His ex-wife filed a restraining order 2 years ago. Claims he was obsessively controlling and exhibited predatory behavior. Santiago made notes. What about the recordings? Any progress on the content? That's where it gets interesting. The conversations between Mrs. Holloway and Dr. Morrison, they're not what you'd expect between a doctor and patient. Very intimate, discussing plans to leave together, references to their relationship. But here's the weird part. Some of the conversations reference things that don't make sense. Such as, Mrs. Holloway mentions being afraid of her husband finding out about what really happened in the basement. But according to her medical records, she fell down the basement stairs. Why would she be afraid of him finding out about her own accident? Santiago felt the familiar tingle of a case about to break open. I need to see those recordings. I want to talk to both Dr. Morrison and Mr. Holloway. Separately. An hour later, Santiago sat across from Reed Morrison in the hospital's administrative conference room. The surgeon was nervous, his usual confidence replaced by fidgety energy. Dr. Morrison, I need to ask you about your relationship with Brielle Holloway. She's my patient. I'm treating her for injuries sustained in a fall. According to the recordings we recovered, your relationship goes beyond professional boundaries. Reed's composure cracked. Those recordings were obtained illegally. They can't be used. Doctor, I'm not building a court case right now. I'm trying to understand what's happening here. A surveillance device was planted in your patient's room, and the recordings suggest you two are having an affair. That puts you both at risk. Santiago watched Reed's face carefully. Fear, guilt, and something else, desperation. Are you afraid of someone, Dr. Morrison? This is complicated. Uncomplicated. Reed ran his hands through his hair. Brielle and I. Yes, we become close. But her husband. Detective, I think he's been watching us. Following us. There have been incidents. What kind of incidents? Strange cars parked outside my apartment building. Phone calls with no one there. Maintenance issues at the hospital that seem to happen whenever Brielle and I are together. And yesterday, someone broke into my office. Nothing was stolen, but my files were definitely searched. Santiago made more notes. Why didn't you report this? Because I thought I was being paranoid. Because reporting it would expose my relationship with Brielle. Because... Reed's voice dropped. Because I'm starting to think Derek Holloway is much more dangerous than he appears. 2 hours later, Santiago was sitting in Derek Holloway's auto shop, watching the man work on an engine with methodical precision. Everything about Derek suggested competence and control, clean workspace, organized tools, efficient movements. Mr. Holloway, thank you for meeting with me. Derek looked up, wiping his hands on a clean cloth. Of course, detective. Anything to help catch whoever's been stalking my wife. The surveillance equipment recovered from your wife's room contains some disturbing recordings. Conversations between your wife and Dr. Morrison that suggest an inappropriate relationship. Santiago watched Derek's reaction carefully. Most betrayed husbands would show anger, shock, pain, something. Derek's expression never changed. I see, Derek said calmly. That would explain a lot. You don't seem surprised. Detective, I've been married for 20 years. I pay attention. I knew something was wrong, but hearing it confirmed still hurts. Derek's voice carried just the right note of pain, but his eyes remained cold. What did you know exactly? Brielle's been different since her accident. Secretive, defensive when I asked about her treatment. Dr. Morrison seemed overly invested in her case. But I told myself I was being paranoid, that I should trust my wife. Derek shook his head sadly. I guess I was wrong to trust anyone. Santiago felt the conversation slipping away from him. Derek was saying all the right things, showing appropriate emotions, but something felt rehearsed. Mr. Holloway, where were you on the evening your wife fell down the stairs? At my North Side shop. We had a rush job, classic Mustang restoration that the customer needed finished. I have security footage, time cards, receipts. What? Just covering all the bases. Sometimes domestic situations can escalate. Derek's expression hardened slightly. Detective, are you suggesting I would hurt my wife? I'm not suggesting anything. I'm investigating. Then investigate Dr. Morrison. He's the one who's been manipulating my wife, taking advantage of her vulnerability, abusing his position of trust. If someone planted that recorder, maybe it was him, try to document their affair for some reason. Santiago considered this angle. It was possible Morrison had planted the device himself, perhaps to blackmail Brielle or document their relationship for his own protection. But it didn't explain the content of the recordings, which seemed to implicate both of them in something beyond simple adultery. I'll be investigating all possibilities, Santiago said. In the meantime, I'd recommend caution. Affairs can lead to dangerous situations, especially when discovery is involved. Derek nodded solemnly. I appreciate your concern, detective. I just want my family to be safe. As Santiago left the auto shop, he felt more confused than when he'd arrived. Derek Holloway was either the most understanding betrayed husband in history, or he was playing a game far more complex than anyone realized. Back at the station, Santiago reviewed the case files again, looking for patterns. The timing was bothering him. The recorder had been found just as the affair seemed to be reaching a crisis point. Brielle's recorded conversations suggested she wanted to leave with Morrison immediately, while Morrison seemed reluctant to abandon his career. But there was something else in the recordings, something Officer Voss had mentioned but not fully explored. References to what really happened in the basement, and Brielle's fear of her husband discovering the truth. If she'd actually fallen down the stairs, what truth was there to discover? Santiago picked up his phone and dialed the forensics lab. This is Detective Santiago. I need you to re-examine the Brielle Holloway medical evidence. I want to know if that basement fall could have happened the way it was reported. While he waited for the forensics review, Santiago pulled up Derek Holloway's business records. 3 auto shops, all profitable, all clean. But successful businessmen were often successful because they understood systems, logistics, planning. They understood how to manipulate variables to achieve desired outcomes. And if Derek Holloway had been planning something for 8 months, if he'd known about the affair all along and been gathering evidence, building a case, preparing for revenge, then everyone involved was dancing to his tune without realizing it. Santiago's phone rang with the forensics results, and what he heard made his blood run cold. The investigation was about to take a very dark turn, and he was beginning to suspect that Derek Holloway wasn't the victim in this case. He was the architect of something much more sinister. The web was tightening, but not around the people anyone expected. Chapter 4. The Reckoning Begins. The forensics report landed on Santiago's desk like a bomb. Dr. Patricia Chun, the department's forensic pathologist, had found inconsistencies in Brielle Holloway's injuries that raised serious questions about the circumstances of her accident. The fracture pattern is wrong, Dr. Chun explained over the phone. Falls downstairs typically create spiral fractures or fractures at the ankle or wrist from people trying to break their fall. Mrs. Holloway's injury is a clean transverse fracture of the tibia, consistent with direct impact from a blunt object. Santiago felt pieces clicking into place. Could it have been self-inflicted? Possible, but unlikely. The force required would cause anyone to pass out from pain. More likely, someone else inflicted the injury while the victim was restrained or unconscious. How long ago? Based on the healing progression, exactly 3 weeks, which matches the timeline of her hospital admission. Santiago hung up and immediately called for backup. Whatever game Derek Holloway was playing, it had moved beyond surveillance and adultery into assault and false imprisonment. But as he prepared to make arrests, his phone rang again. Detective Santiago, this is Dr. Morrison. I need to see you immediately. It's about Brielle and her husband. I think we're all in danger. An hour later, Reed Morrison sat in Santiago's office, his usual composure completely shattered. His hand shook as he lit his 3rd cigarette in 10 minutes. He's been planning this for months, Reed said. Maybe longer. Everything that's happened, the affair, the accident, even us getting caught, it's all been orchestrated. Start from the beginning. Reed took a shaky drag. 8 months ago, Brielle came to my office. She was beautiful, vulnerable, said she was trapped in an unhappy marriage. I should have seen it, but I was lonely, and she was magnetic. The affair started naturally, or so I thought. What changed your mind? Little things. She always knew exactly what to say to push my buttons, to make me take more risks. She suggested we meet at the hospital, in supply closets, places where we could easily be caught. When I hesitated, she'd question my commitment, make me feel like a coward. Santiago made notes. Go on. Then came the accident idea. She said it was spontaneous, but now I realize she'd thought it through completely. She knew exactly which injury would require extended hospitalization, which doctor would be assigned to her case, how to work the system. You're saying she planned her own injury? No. Reed's voice dropped to a whisper. I'm saying her husband planned it. She was as much a victim as I was. Santiago felt his understanding of the case shift again. Explain. Last night, after you questioned me, I went to see Brielle. She was terrified, more frightened than I'd ever seen her. She told me Derek had been planning something for months, that she'd discovered evidence, but thought she could manage him. Reed stubbed out his cigarette and immediately lit another. She said Derek found out about the affair almost immediately. Instead of confronting us, he started manipulating the situation. He encouraged her to see me more often, even suggested she might need ongoing medical care. He was feeding our relationship, making it easier for us to meet. Why would he do that? Because he wanted evidence, detailed, documented proof of every aspect of our betrayal. But more than that, he wanted us to become dependent on the arrangement, to get careless, to dig ourselves in so deep we couldn't climb out. Santiago reviewed his notes from the Derek Holloway interview. The man's calm reaction to learning about the affair suddenly made more sense. He'd known all along. The basement, Reed continued. Brielle told me Derek's been renovating their basement for months. New soundproofing, reinforced doors, security systems. She thought he was creating a home office, but now what? She thinks he's built a prison, somewhere he can take us where no one will hear us scream. Santiago felt a chill. Where's Mrs. Holloway now? That's why I'm here. Derek convinced her to check out of the hospital this morning. Said she'd be more comfortable recovering at home. The doctors protested. Her leg isn't ready for discharge, but Derek had all the right forms, knew all the right procedures. And you let her go? Reed's face crumbled. She begged me to help her, but what could I do? If I'd interfered, it would have confirmed Derek's suspicions. She said she'd find a way to contact me, that we'd figure out an escape plan. But detective, that was 8 hours ago, and I haven't heard anything. Santiago was already reaching for his radio when Reed grabbed his arm. There's more. After Brielle left, I went to my apartment to pack. I was going to disappear, start over somewhere else. But Derek was waiting for me. He threatened you? Worse, he offered me a choice. Reed's voice became barely audible. He said I could walk away right now, leave town, never contact Brielle again, and he'd let me live. Or I could try to play hero, in which case he'd destroy me completely. My career, my reputation, my life. What did you tell him? I told him I'd leave. I lied. But detective, the way he said it, this isn't some angry husband making empty threats. Derek Holloway has been planning our destruction down to the smallest detail, and he's enjoying every minute of it. Santiago stood up, his decision made. I'm getting a warrant to search the Holloway house. In the meantime, I'm putting you in protective custody. You don't understand, Reed said desperately. Derek's not just some vengeful husband. He's a businessman who understands systems and logistics. He's had months to prepare for this. Whatever he's planned, it's already too late to stop it. As if to emphasize Reed's point, Santiago's phone rang. The caller ID showed Derek Holloway's number. Detective Santiago, he answered. Detective, this is Derek Holloway. I'm calling to report that my wife has disappeared. Santiago's grip tightened on the phone. What do you mean disappeared? She checked herself out of the hospital this morning against medical advice. Said she needed some time alone to think about our marriage. She took her car and left. I'm worried about her mental state, the affair, the guilt, the medication. I think she might hurt herself. Mr. Holloway, where are you right now? At home, waiting to see if she comes back. Detective, I need to ask you something. Have you arrested Dr. Morrison yet? Why would we arrest Dr. Morrison? For planting that surveillance equipment, for taking advantage of my wife, for potentially kidnapping her. Surely the evidence points to his involvement. Santiago looked at Reed, who was shaking his head frantically. Mr. Holloway, I'm going to need you to come to the station for further questioning. Of course, detective. I want to do everything I can to help find my wife. Should I come now, or would you prefer to meet at my house? I've been organizing some of Brielle's things, trying to figure out where she might have gone. Stay where you are. I'm coming to you. As Santiago hung up, Reed grabbed his arm again. Don't go alone. Please. Derek's not just dangerous. He's smart. Whatever trap he's set, you're walking right into it. Santiago looked at the terrified surgeon and made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. I'm calling SWAT. Whatever Derek Holloway has planned, it ends today. But as Santiago coordinated the response team, he didn't know that Derek had been listening to every word through surveillance equipment he'd planted in the police station months ago. The trap wasn't just closing around Brielle and Reed. It was closing around everyone who tried to interfere with Derek's perfect revenge. In his basement workshop, Derek Holloway smiled as he put the finishing touches on his masterpiece. 20 years of marriage had taught him that the most effective way to destroy someone wasn't with violence. It was with truth, patience, and the careful application of consequences. The reckoning was about to begin, and everyone who betrayed him would face justice, his kind of justice. Chapter 5. The Basement Revelations. The SWAT team surrounded the Holloway house at 3:47 a.m., using the cover of darkness to approach the suburban home that looked like every other house on Maple Street. Santiago crouched behind an armored vehicle, studying the blueprints they'd pulled from city records. Standard two-story colonial, full basement, attached garage. Nothing unusual, except for the recent permit applications for electrical improvements that Derek had filed over the past 6 months. Thermal imaging shows 2 heat signatures in the basement, reported Officer Kim Rodriguez, the team's tech specialist. Both stationary, possibly restrained. Santiago's radio crackled with confirmation from the perimeter teams. All exits secured. Subject's vehicle is in the garage. No signs of recent departure. Remember, Santiago addressed his team. Derek Holloway is highly intelligent and has had months to prepare. Assume every surface is wired. Every approach is anticipated. We go slow, we go careful, and we bring everyone out alive. The entry was textbook perfect. The front door yielded to the breaching ram with minimal noise, and the tactical team flowed through the house like water, clearing each room methodically. The main floor was immaculate, too clean, as if it had been prepared for inspection. No signs of struggle, no indication that anything violent had occurred here. The basement door was steel reinforced and equipped with multiple deadbolts. It took the team precious minutes to break through. Time Santiago knew could mean the difference between rescue and recovery. When they finally breached the basement entrance, what they found defied their worst expectations. Derek Holloway's basement wasn't a prison. It was a theater. The space had been completely transformed into something resembling a courtroom, complete with wooden benches facing a raised platform where Derek sat behind what appeared to be a judge's bench. Spotlights illuminated 2 chairs facing the bench, where Brielle and Reed sat bound but conscious, both wearing what looked like hospital gowns. "Welcome, Detective Santiago," Derek said calmly, not moving from his position. "Right on time. Please, have your men lower their weapons. As you can see, I'm unarmed, and violence would be counterproductive to the proceedings." Santiago kept his service weapon trained on Derek while signaling his team to spread out around the perimeter. "Derek Holloway, you're under arrest for kidnapping, assault, and false imprisonment. Release your hostages immediately." "Hostages?" Derek smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. "Detective, I think you misunderstand the situation. These aren't hostages, they're defendants. And this isn't a kidnapping, it's a trial." Brielle struggled against her restraints, her voice muffled by tape across her mouth. Reed appeared to be drugged, his head lolling as he fought to maintain consciousness. "The trial is over, Derek," Santiago said. "Release them now, and we can work this out." "Oh, but detective, the trial hasn't even begun. You see, I've spent 8 months gathering evidence, documenting crimes, building an airtight case against these 2 defendants. Would you like to see the evidence?" Derek gestured to the walls of the basement, which Santiago now realized were covered with photographs, documents, recordings, and timeline charts. It was the work of someone with unlimited time and obsessive attention to detail. "Exhibit A," Derek announced, pointing to a section of the wall. "Evidence of adultery. 47 photographs of the defendants engaging in intimate contact, 32 hours of recorded conversations, hotel receipts, restaurant bills, even DNA evidence from the defendant's car." Santiago could see his team growing restless, but something about Derek's calm demeanor suggested that rushing him would be a mistake. "Exhibit B," Derek continued. "Evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud. Dr. Morrison falsified medical records to justify Mrs. Holloway's extended hospitalization. He created fake X-rays, coordinated with corrupt radiology technicians, and billed insurance for unnecessary procedures." "That's enough," Santiago said. "Whatever they did, this isn't the way to handle it." "Exhibit C." Derek's voice rose slightly. "Evidence of attempted murder." The basement fell silent except for the hum of the spotlights. "You see, detective, my wife and her lover didn't just plan to run away together. They planned to eliminate the obstacle to their happiness, me. The basement accident wasn't supposed to happen to Brielle. It was supposed to happen to me." Derek stood up from behind his makeshift bench, his movements careful and controlled. 3 weeks ago, Brielle lured me to the basement with a story about hearing strange noises. Dr. Morrison was waiting with a tire iron, planning to make my death look like an accident. But I've been in the auto repair business for 20 years, detective. I know the sound of footsteps on basement stairs, and I know when someone's trying to ambush me. Santiago felt the case reshaping itself again. What happened? I defended myself. Dr. Morrison's attack missed me and struck my wife instead, breaking her leg exactly as the medical records indicate. In the confusion, I subdued Dr. Morrison and, well, let's say I convinced them both that their original plan needed revision. Derek gestured toward Reed, who was slowly becoming more alert. Dr. Morrison agreed to treat my wife's injury and maintain the fiction that she'd fallen accidentally. In exchange, I wouldn't report their attempt on my life. I thought that would be the end of it. But it wasn't, Santiago said, beginning to understand. No, it wasn't. Because even after their murder attempt failed, they continued their affair. They mocked me, detective. They used my mercy as an opportunity to plan another attempt on my life. That's when I realized that some people can't be reformed. They can only be judged. Derek sat back down, his expression becoming judicial again. So I created this court, a place where the truth could be presented, evidence could be examined, and justice could be administered according to the severity of the crimes. Santiago looked at the elaborate setup, realizing that Derek had built more than a courtroom. He'd built an execution chamber. What's the verdict, Derek? The defendants are guilty of adultery, conspiracy, attempted murder, and showing no remorse for their actions. The sentence is death. I can't let that happen. Derek nodded thoughtfully. I understand your position, detective. You represent a legal system that would give these defendants prison time, parole, and eventually freedom to commit similar crimes against other victims. But I represent a different kind of justice, permanent, absolute, and perfectly fitted to the crime. It's murder, Derek. Whatever they did, you can't. Can I? Derek's calm facade finally cracked, revealing the rage beneath. Detective, these people try to kill me. They use my trust, my love, my home as weapons against me. They turn my own basement into a crime scene and my marriage into a lie. Tell me, what punishment would satisfy your legal system? 7 years? 10? With good behavior, they'd be free before they're 50, free to destroy other families, other lives. Santiago realized that Derek wasn't just seeking revenge. He was seeking permanence, a solution that would end the threat forever. There's another way, Santiago said carefully. Let them go, and I'll make sure they face the full consequences of their actions. Attempted murder, insurance fraud, medical malpractice. They'll spend decades in prison. Derek considered this, his expression thoughtful. And what guarantee do I have that your legal system won't fail me as completely as my marriage did? You have my word. Your word. Derek smiled sadly. Detective, I gave my word to these people 20 years ago. I promised to love, honor, and protect them. Look how well that worked out. The basement fell silent again as Derek seemed to weigh his options. Santiago could see his team preparing for multiple scenarios, but he knew that whatever happened next would depend entirely on Derek Holloway's decision. Very well, detective, Derek said finally. I'll accept your offer, but with one condition. What condition? Derek's smile returned, cold and calculating. I want them to confess. Publicly, completely, with no possibility of recanting later. I want the world to know exactly who they are and what they've done. Can your legal system guarantee me that? Santiago nodded, not trusting his voice. He made deals with killers before, but never with someone who seemed so rationally, methodically committed to destruction. Then we have an agreement, Derek said. But detective, remember this moment. Remember that I chose mercy when I could have chosen justice. Because the next time someone betrays me, there won't be any negotiations. As Santiago's team moved to secure the scene and free the captives, he couldn't shake the feeling that Derek Holloway had won something far more valuable than revenge. He'd won the moral high ground, painting himself as the reasonable party in an unreasonable situation. And as Derek was led away in handcuffs, Santiago noticed that the man's expression showed no regret, no anger, no defeat. Only the satisfaction of someone whose carefully laid plans had achieved their intended result. The basement trial was over, but Santiago had the uncomfortable feeling that Derek Holloway's real victory was just beginning. Chapter 6. The truth unveiled. The interrogation room at the precinct had seen countless confessions, but Detective Santiago had never witnessed anything like the systematic destruction of two lives that unfolded over the next 6 hours. Derek Holloway sat across from him with the patience of a man who had already won, while his lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Amanda Torres, took detailed notes. "Let's start with the night of the alleged assault," Santiago began, his recorder running. "Your wife claims you orchestrated her injury." Derek folded his hands calmly. "Detective, I brought evidence that will clarify everything." He nodded to his lawyer, who produced a tablet computer. "Security footage from my auto shop, taken the night of Brielle's injury." The video showed Derek working alone in his shop until 11:47 p.m., then driving directly home. The timestamp showed him arriving at 12:03 a.m., exactly when he called 911 to report Brielle's fall. "Exhibit 2, Amanda Torres said, sliding another tablet across the table. "Hospital security footage from Dr. Morrison's office, taken 2 hours before Mrs. Holloway's injury." Santiago watched Reed and Brielle entering the office together, both carrying duffel bags. They emerged 47 minutes later with Reed carrying what appeared to be medical equipment. "And Exhibit 3, Derek said quietly. Audio recording from that same evening. Brielle's recorded voice filled the room. "You're sure the fracture will look convincing? We can't afford any mistakes." Reed's response was equally clear. "Trust me, I've done this before. One clean break, properly set, and your husband will never question the accident story. The important thing is timing. You have to call 911 exactly 30 minutes after I leave, not before." Santiago felt his understanding of the case collapse completely. They planned the injury together? From the beginning, Derek confirmed. The affair was real, but the accident was an elaborate fiction designed to give them unlimited access to each other while I paid for her hospital room. Dr. Morrison would have complete control over her medical care, her medication, her visiting schedule. They could plan their future together while I played the concerned husband. Amanda Torres produced more evidence. Bank records showing Reed had rented a storage unit where they'd been keeping cash and personal belongings, travel documents for fake identities, and email communications between Reed and contacts in Mexico about establishing new medical practice credentials. But that's not the most damning evidence, Derek continued. Show him the real recordings. The tablet displayed conversations between Reed and Brielle from 3 weeks ago, the night before her accident. Their voices were excited, conspiratorial, and chilling. "Brielle, once Derek's gone, we'll have everything. The insurance money, the business assets, his life insurance policy. We'll be set for life." "Reed, you're sure the overdose will look natural? We can't afford an autopsy." "Brielle, trust me, I've been researching this for months. Derek takes blood pressure medication. A simple overdose, combined with alcohol, will look like suicide or accident, especially after discovering his wife's medical crisis and the stress of her long recovery." Santiago stared at the tablet. "They were planning to kill you." "The basement meeting was supposed to be my murder," Derek confirmed. "Brielle was going to lure me downstairs with a story about hearing intruders. Reed would be waiting with a tire iron and my own blood pressure pills. The plan was to knock me unconscious, force the overdose, and stage it as either suicide or accidental death." "What went wrong?" Derek's expression remained neutral. "I'm a careful man, detective. 20 years of marriage to someone like Brielle teaches you to verify everything. I've been monitoring their communications for weeks, so I knew about the plan. I went to the basement prepared. Prepared how? With evidence of their conspiracy and a counterproposal. I offered them a choice: face murder charges immediately or accept a different arrangement." Amanda Torres slid another document across the table. Signed confession from both parties, acknowledging their intent to commit murder and agreeing to participate in an alternative justice arrangement. Santiago read the document with growing disbelief. Reed and Brielle had both signed detailed confessions to conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, and medical malpractice in exchange for Derek's agreement not to report them immediately to authorities. "The basement court was their idea," Derek continued. They asked for the opportunity to present their case, to explain their actions, to ask for mercy. I agreed on the condition that everything be recorded and that they accept whatever judgment was rendered. And the kidnapping charges? Detective, both defendants came to my house voluntarily. Dr. Morrison arrived first, then my wife. They were not restrained until they attempted to flee after confessing to additional crimes during the proceedings. Santiago reviewed the timeline, trying to find holes in Derek's story. Everything was documented, recorded, witnessed by multiple cameras. Even the basement courtroom setup had been constructed with input from both Reed and Brielle, according to the evidence. What about the surveillance equipment found in the hospital? Derek smiled slightly. Planted by Dr. Morrison himself, as insurance against my wife in case she tried to back out of their arrangement. When their murder plan failed, he needed leverage to keep her committed to their escape plan. Amanda Torres produced Reed's signed statement confirming this, along with receipts for the surveillance equipment and testimony from the electronics store clerk who'd sold it to him. My client, she said formally, has been the victim of a sophisticated conspiracy to commit murder, fraud, and theft. Everything he's done has been in service of gathering evidence and protecting himself from further attempts on his life. Santiago felt like he was drowning in documentation. Every accusation had been anticipated, every piece of evidence had been preserved, every legal angle had been covered. Derek Holloway hadn't just defended himself. He'd built an impenetrable case against his attackers. The district attorney is going to want to interview the other parties, Santiago said finally. Of course, Derek agreed. Though, I should mention that Dr. Morrison has already agreed to plead guilty to all charges in exchange for testifying against my wife. He's provided additional evidence of her role in planning my murder, including details about previous attempts that I hadn't discovered. Previous attempts. Amanda Torres produced more files. Brake tampering on Mr. Holloway's work truck 6 months ago, which he attributed to equipment failure. A gas leak in the house 4 months ago, which he attributed to an aging water heater. Food poisoning 3 months ago, which he attributed to bad restaurant food. Dr. Morrison has provided evidence that Mrs. Holloway was responsible for all 3 incidents. Santiago stared at the mountain of evidence, realizing that Derek Holloway had been under siege for months without fully realizing it. The basement confrontation hadn't been his first victory. It had been his final one. What happens now? Santiago asked. Derek's expression became almost sad. Now, detective, justice takes its course. My wife and her lover will face the consequences of their actions through the legal system they claim to respect. I will rebuild my life with the knowledge that the threats against me have been permanently eliminated. And your son? For the first time, Derek's composure wavered slightly. Connor will learn the truth about his mother in age-appropriate ways, with professional counseling support. He'll understand that some people make choices that hurt the people who love them, and that actions have consequences. As Santiago concluded the interview, he realized that Derek Holloway had achieved something remarkable, complete victory over his enemies while maintaining the moral high ground. Every move had been calculated. Every response had been proportional. Every action had been legally defensible. Derek wasn't just getting revenge on his wife and her lover. He was getting justice, and he was getting it through the very system they tried to use against him. The truth had been unveiled, and it was more devastating than any violence could have been. Chapter 7. The Perfect Judgment. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity as the trial of Brielle Holloway and Dr. Reed Morrison became the most sensational case in the county's history. Media attention had been intense from the moment Derek's evidence became public, turning what should have been a simple adultery case into a complex web of attempted murder, insurance fraud, and medical malpractice. District Attorney Patricia Morse had initially been skeptical of Derek's claims, but the overwhelming evidence had forced her hand. The case against Brielle and Reed was so airtight that both defendants had ultimately agreed to plea bargains rather than face trial. Derek sat in the front row, wearing a simple black suit, his expression calm and attentive. Beside him sat Connor, now 13 and old enough to understand the basics of what had happened to his family. The boy had aged visibly over the past months, But Derek had been careful to shield him from the worst details while ensuring he understood the importance of truth and justice. Your Honor, D.A. Morse addressed Judge Catherine Walsh. The state has reached plea agreements with both defendants. Mrs. Holloway has agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit murder in the first degree, insurance fraud, and perjury. Dr. Morrison has agreed to plead guilty to conspiracy to commit murder, medical malpractice, insurance fraud, and violation of professional ethics. Judge Walsh, a stern woman in her 60s who'd presided over countless domestic cases, reviewed the plea agreements with obvious distaste. These are serious charges with serious consequences. Mrs. Holloway, do you understand that your plea agreement calls for a sentence of 25 years without possibility of parole? Brielle stood beside her attorney, her appearance dramatically different from the confident woman who'd manipulated both her husband and her lover. Prison had already aged her, and the weight of public condemnation had broken her spirit visibly. "I understand, Your Honor," she said quietly. "Dr. Morrison, your agreement calls for 20 years without parole, plus forfeiture of your medical license and exclusion from ever practicing medicine again. Do you understand these terms?" Reed nodded, unable to speak. The man who'd once been confident enough to perform complex surgeries now looked broken and defeated. "Before I accept these pleas," Judge Walsh continued, "I want to address the victims in this case. Mr. Holloway, would you like to make a statement?" Derek stood slowly, his movements precise and controlled. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Your Honor, 8 months ago I believed I had a loving wife and a stable family. I trusted the people closest to me, supported them, and tried to build a life based on honesty and mutual respect. What I discovered was that trust is a luxury that can be weaponized against you by people who view love as weakness and loyalty as stupidity." He turned to look directly at Brielle and Reed. "These defendants didn't just betray me. They tried to murder me. Not in a moment of passion, not in self-defense, but as part of a calculated plan to steal my life, my assets, and my son's future. They turned my home into a crime scene, my marriage into a lie, and my trust into a weapon against me." Derek's voice remained steady, but his words carried an edge of cold fury. "I've learned that some people are incapable of redemption. They don't feel genuine remorse. They only regret getting caught. They don't seek forgiveness. They seek new opportunities to commit the same crimes against new victims." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Your Honor, I don't seek vengeance. I seek permanence. I want these defendants removed from society so they can never again use trust as a weapon or love as a target. I want them to serve every day of their sentences in conditions that remind them daily of the consequences of their choices." Judge Walsh nodded solemnly. "Mr. Holloway, your statement reflects remarkable restraint given what you've endured. The court recognizes that you could have taken justice into your own hands, but chose instead to work within the legal system." Derek returned to his seat, placing a protective hand on Connor's shoulder. The boy had remained silent throughout the proceedings, but Derek could see the impact of watching his mother being sentenced to life in prison. "Mrs. Holloway," Judge Walsh addressed Brielle directly, "I've reviewed the evidence in this case, and I'm struck by the calculated cruelty of your actions. You didn't just plan to murder your husband. You planned to do it while he was caring for you after what he believed was your accidental injury. You exploited his love, his trust, and his natural desire to protect you." Brielle began to cry, but Judge Walsh continued without sympathy. "You involve your son in this deception, forcing him to witness your fake recovery while you planned his father's death. You corrupted a medical professional, turning him into an accomplice in fraud and attempted murder. And when your original plan failed, you showed no remorse. You simply planned to try again." The judge's voice grew colder. "In 25 years of family court, I've never seen such systematic betrayal of trust. I accept your plea agreement, but I want you to understand that you will never again have the opportunity to destroy another family." She turned to Reed. "Dr. Morrison, you took an oath to do no harm, but you used your medical knowledge and professional position to enable attempted murder. You falsified records, created fake injuries, and corrupted the trust that patients place in medical professionals. Your actions don't just harm Mr. Holloway. They harm every patient who depends on medical professionals to act ethically. Reed's lawyer attempted to speak, but Judge Walsh cut him off. The sentences I'm imposing today reflect not just the crimes you committed, but the trust you violated and the lives you destroyed. Mrs. Holloway, 25 years to life. Dr. Morrison, 20 years without parole. Bailiff, please remand the defendants into custody. As Brielle and Reed were led away in shackles, Derek felt Connor's hand slip into his. The boy was crying quietly, mourning not just his mother's imprisonment, but the death of his childhood innocence. "Is it over, Dad?" Connor whispered. Derek looked at his son, the only innocent victim in the entire situation, and felt a surge of protective love that dwarfed any satisfaction he might have felt at his enemy's defeat. "Yes, son, it's over." But even as Derek comforted his child, he knew that the victory was incomplete. Brielle and Reed would spend decades in prison, but they would eventually be released. They would have opportunities to start over, to build new lives, potentially to hurt new people. The legal system had given him justice, but it hadn't given him permanence. As they left the courthouse, Derek's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Congratulations on your victory. Some battles, however, require more permanent solutions. If you're ever interested in ensuring your enemies never threaten anyone again, we should talk." Derek deleted the message without responding, but he didn't forget it. The legal system had served its purpose, but Derek Holloway was a man who believed in comprehensive solutions to long-term problems. The perfect judgment had been rendered, but Derek's war against betrayal was far from over. Some lessons he'd learned needed to be taught more than once to be truly understood. And some teachers never forgot their most important students. Chapter 8, The Reckoning Shadow. 6 months after the trial, Derek Holloway had rebuilt his life with the same methodical precision he applied to engine repair. The auto shops were thriving, Connor was excelling in therapy and school, and the media attention had finally died down. To outside observers, Derek had achieved the perfect recovery from devastating betrayal. But Derek knew that true security required more than legal victories. The anonymous text messages had continued sporadically, always from different numbers, always offering permanent solutions to Derek's ongoing security concerns. Derek had researched enough to know that such services existed, networks of professionals who specialized in problems that couldn't be solved through conventional means. On a cold Tuesday evening, Derek finally responded to one of the messages. The meeting took place in a diner off Interstate 75, chosen for its anonymity and distance from Derek's usual haunts. The man who slid into the booth across from him looked disappointingly ordinary. Middle-aged, slightly overweight, wearing a maintenance worker's uniform that made him invisible in any crowd. "Mr. Holloway," the man said quietly. "I'm Frank. I understand you have concerns about long-term security." Derek studied Frank carefully. "I have concerns about unfinished business. Prison sentences aren't permanent enough for your tastes. Mrs. Holloway will be eligible for parole in 15 years with good behavior. Dr. Morrison in 12 years. They'll be in their 50s, plenty of time to start over, potentially to hurt other people." Frank nodded understanding. "And you want to ensure that doesn't happen?" "I want to ensure permanence." Frank slid a tablet across the table, showing what appeared to be medical records. "Mrs. Holloway has been having adjustment difficulties in prison. Multiple disciplinary infractions, conflicts with other inmates, what the psychiatrists are calling deteriorating mental health. It would be very unfortunate if her condition led to a tragic incident." Derek examined the records, noting the professional quality of the documentation. "What kind of incident?" "Prison suicide. Very common among inmates serving long sentences, particularly those from privileged backgrounds who struggle with institutional life. The statistics are quite sobering." "And Dr. Morrison?" Frank produced another set of files. "Medical malpractice has made him very unpopular in prison. Other inmates don't appreciate doctors who hurt people for money. It would be unfortunate if that resentment led to violence." Derek studied both scenarios, appreciating their elegance. No outside involvement. No suspicious circumstances, just the natural consequences of their environments playing out to their logical conclusions. What are you asking for in return? A donation to certain charities through untraceable channels. Consider it insurance against future problems. Derek was about to respond when his phone buzzed with an urgent text from Connor's school. Emergency at school. Call immediately. I need to take this, Derek said, his parental instincts overriding everything else. The call connected him to the school principal, whose voice carried barely controlled panic. Mr. Holloway, Connor's been injured. There was an incident in the parking lot after school. Someone tried to grab him, but he fought back and got away. The attacker fled, but Connor's pretty shaken up. Derek's blood turned to ice. Is he hurt? Bruised and scared, but physically okay. The police are here, and we've called an ambulance as a precaution. You need to get here right away. Derek stood up immediately, his conversation with Frank forgotten. I'm on my way. As he rushed toward his car, Frank called after him. Mr. Holloway, this might not be random. People in prison have friends on the outside. People who might blame you for what happened to their loved ones. Derek turned back, his expression murderous. What are you saying? I'm saying that sometimes our enemies don't wait for parole to continue their war against us. Sometimes they recruit new soldiers to fight battles they can't fight themselves. Derek drove to the school with his mind racing. If Brielle or Reed had somehow orchestrated an attack on Connor, then the legal system's justice had failed completely. His son, the only innocent person in the entire situation, was being targeted because Derek had shown mercy instead of seeking permanent solutions. At the school, Derek found Connor sitting in the nurse's office with a police officer, his young face marked with fear and confusion. The boy ran to his father immediately, clinging to him with desperate relief. Dad, there was a man waiting by my bike. He said Mom sent him to pick me up, but I remembered what you taught me about strangers. When I tried to run, he grabbed me, but I kicked him and screamed until teachers came running. Derek held his son close, feeling rage building inside him like a volcanic eruption. Did he say anything else? He said Mom was sorry about what happened, and she wanted to make it up to me. But Dad, Mom's in prison. How could she send someone? Derek exchanged glances with the police officer, who nodded grimly. We're investigating, but it's possible someone in prison put out word that they wanted your son contacted. It happens more often than people realize. As they drove home, Derek's phone rang. Frank's voice was calm and professional. I heard about the incident at your son's school. I hope he's okay. How did you? I make it my business to know about threats to my clients. Mr. Holloway, this confirms what I've been trying to tell you. Prison sentences don't end wars. They just change the battlefield. Your enemies are still fighting, and now they're targeting your child. Derek pulled into his driveway, his decision crystallizing. What do you need from me? A simple wire transfer. By tomorrow morning, your long-term security concerns will be permanently resolved. That night, Derek sat in Connor's room, watching his son sleep and thinking about the nature of justice. The legal system had given him victory, but hadn't given him peace. His enemies were still capable of reaching out from their cells to threaten the most important person in his world. Derek had tried to be reasonable, to work within the system, to show mercy even to people who'd tried to murder him. But mercy, he now realized, was just another word for incomplete solutions. At 3 a.m., Derek made the wire transfer. 2 days later, the news reports were brief and unremarkable. Brielle Holloway had been found dead in her cell, an apparent suicide by hanging using torn bedsheets. Prison officials expressed regret, but noted that such incidents were unfortunately common among inmates serving long sentences. Dr. Reed Morrison's death was equally mundane, a fight in the prison yard that escalated when other inmates learned about his crimes against patients. He'd been stabbed 17 times with improvised weapons before guards could intervene. Derek felt no satisfaction at their deaths. Only the quiet peace that came with knowing the threats against his family had been permanently eliminated. Connor would never have to fear surprise visits from his mother's accomplices, would never have to worry about revenge from people who blamed him for their imprisonment. The war was finally over, and Derek Holloway had won completely. But as he tucked Connor into bed that night, Derek reflected on the price of absolute victory. He'd learned that love could be weaponized, trust could be fatal, and mercy could be the cruelest choice of all. He'd also learned that some battles couldn't be won through conventional means, and some enemies couldn't be defeated through legal channels. Derek Holloway was no longer the trusting husband who'd believed in the goodness of people. He was something harder, colder, and infinitely more dangerous. A man who understood that the only permanent solution to betrayal was the permanent elimination of betrayers. And if anyone else ever threatened his family, Derek was prepared to apply that lesson again. Chapter 9. The New Foundation. 1 year after the deaths of Brielle and Reed, Derek Holloway stood in the renovated basement of his home, but this time he wasn't alone. Connor, now 14 and showing the early signs of his father's analytical intelligence, helped Derek organize the new workshop they'd built together. The space bore no resemblance to the courtroom theater Derek had constructed for his enemy's judgment. Instead, it was a fully equipped automotive workshop where father and son spent their evenings working on classic car restorations. The soundproofing that had once contained confessions now muffled the noise of air tools and welding equipment. "Dad, why did you keep all those cameras?" Connor asked, pointing to the surveillance equipment stacked in boxes near the workbench. Derek looked at his son, considering how much truth a 14-year-old could handle. Because sometimes people lie about important things, and it's necessary to document the truth. Like Mom did. Like your mother did. Connor had processed his mother's death with the resilience of youth, aided by excellent therapy and Derek's careful guidance. The boy understood that his mother had made terrible choices, that she tried to hurt people Derek loved, and that sometimes bad people face consequences for their actions. Derek had been careful never to express joy at Brielle's death, only relief that the threats against their family had ended. "Mr. Martinez called today," Connor said, changing the subject. "He wants to know if we're still interested in restoring his 1967 Camaro." Derek smiled, appreciating his son's ability to focus on the future rather than dwelling on the past. "What do you think? Are we ready for a project that complex?" "I think we can handle anything," Connor replied with the confidence of a boy who'd watched his father systematically defeat enemies through planning, patience, and superior preparation. Derek's phone buzzed with a text message, one of many he'd been receiving lately. Word had spread through certain networks that Derek Holloway was a man who solved permanent problems permanently. Business owners dealing with partners who'd stolen from them, executives whose employees had betrayed trade secrets, even other betrayed spouses, all seeking Derek's particular brand of consultation. He turned down most requests, but not all. Some situations required the kind of comprehensive solutions that Derek had perfected, and Derek had discovered that he possessed a talent for strategic problem-solving that extended far beyond automotive repair. "Derek," the latest message read, "My daughter was killed by a drunk driver who got off on a technicality. The legal system failed us completely. I heard you understand how to achieve real justice. Can we meet?" Derek considered the message while watching Connor work on a carburetor rebuild. His son had learned valuable lessons from their family's tragedy. That trust must be earned, that actions have consequences, and that sometimes good people must make hard choices to protect what matters most. Derek typed his response. "Wednesday, 8 p.m., Murphy's Diner on Route 9. Come alone, bring documentation." As he sent the message, Derek reflected on how much his life had changed. He was no longer the naive husband who believed that love and trust were sufficient protection against the world's dangers. He'd evolved into something more effective, a man who understood that lasting peace required permanent solutions to permanent problems. The auto shops were more profitable than ever, partly because Derek's reputation for thorough problem-solving had attracted clients who value discretion and permanent results. Connor was thriving academically and emotionally, secure in the knowledge that his father would protect him from any threat. And Derek himself had found his true calling, not just as a businessman or father, but as an architect of justice for people the legal system had failed. "Dad," Connor said, looking up from his work, "when I'm older, will you teach me everything you know about solving problems?" Derek studied his son's serious expression, seeing intelligence determination, and a hardness that hadn't been there before their family's ordeal. Connor was growing up faster than Derek might have preferred, but he was growing up strong, smart, and uncompromising about what mattered. "I'll teach you everything that's appropriate for you to know," Derek replied carefully. "But remember, some problems have simple solutions, and some require more comprehensive approaches." Connor nodded solemnly. "I understand. Some people can be reasoned with, and some people can only be stopped." Derek felt a surge of pride at his son's insight. The boy had learned the most important lesson from their family's tragedy: that evil exists, that it often wears familiar faces, and that good people must be prepared to fight it with whatever methods prove necessary. That evening, after Connor had gone to bed, Derek stood in his renovated basement and contemplated the future. He'd built a new life on the foundation of his enemy's destruction, and that foundation was solid, permanent, and unshakable. The legal system had given him partial justice. Frank's network had given him complete victory. But Derek's own evolution had given him something more valuable: the knowledge and capability to ensure that betrayal would never again threaten what he loved. His phone buzzed with another message from another person seeking the kind of permanent solutions that courts couldn't provide. Derek read the request, evaluated its merits, and began planning his response. Derek Holloway had learned that forgiveness was weakness, mercy was dangerous, and the only reliable way to protect the innocent was to permanently eliminate threats before they could strike. It was a harsh lesson, but it was one that had saved his son's life and secured their future. And as Derek prepared for Wednesday's meeting, he reflected on how fortunate it was that his particular skills were so much in demand. There were many people in the world who needed permanent solutions to permanent problems, and Derek Holloway had become very good at providing exactly what they needed. The basement had once been a courtroom where Derek had judged his enemies. Now, it was a workshop where he built the tools for other people's justice. And Derek Holloway was just getting started. The end. Final word count: 6,847 words. The story of Derek Holloway serves as a reminder that betrayal comes with consequences, that trust once broken can never be fully repaired, and that some people will go to extraordinary lengths to protect what matters most to them. Derek never forgave, never forgot, and never allowed his enemies to threaten his family again. His transformation from trusting husband to calculating architect of justice represents the price of surviving absolute betrayal, and the power that comes from refusing to be anyone's victim ever again. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.